Hi, I'm Lauren, and my current hyperfixation is Twin Peaks. So, when I was told that I could research anything I wanted, I knew it had to involve Twin Peaks in some way, or else I'd blow up from not being able to talk about it. Which, no, but it feels that way. When I sat down to write this presentation and this paper, I thought about what really makes me interested, what really confuses me. And I started to wonder why we feel so scared when watching horror movies and what contributes to that. To answer this, I looked into Freud's and Jung's theories, and I saw how horror becomes a science-backed art form when those theories are utilized. I found that really Freud's ideas of defense mechanisms and repression and the Unheimlich, and then Jung's theories on archetypes and the idea of shadow self really come into play when talking about horror movies. So why do they scare us so much? Most people know Sigmund Freud as the ultimate yo mama joke maker, but what many forget is his big theories on defense mechanisms. And specifically what I found in my research pertaining to horror movies is that repression is huge. When we're talking about repression, we're talking about things that we want to hide from society. So we pretend, or really our subconscious tricks us into forgetting them. Like, for example, I just remember that I don't know how to ride a bike, but I don't want to think about it because apparently that's not cool, and most people know how to ride a bike, which I really shouldn't have told you guys because this is a professional research presentation and I want to seem accredited, but I digress. In horror media, when we talk about repression, it mainly shows up in our villains and our monsters because we take all the parts of society that we don't like and parts of people that we don't like, and we put them onto the villains that we hate and the monsters that we're scared of. Now that we've talked about things that society doesn't like, I'm going to talk about something that I don't like. Every year around Christmas, there is one movie that I just can't watch, and that's The Polar Express. And the big reason why, and I know I'm not the only one who thinks this, so I'm not just a hater, I hate how the kids look. And that's a terrible thing to say, but it's actually backed by Freud. We know this idea, the uncanny valley, when you look at things that almost look human but aren't really, like the kids in The Polar Express, and how hyper-realistic they are. And with Freud, he says that that's called Unheimlich, and that's an actual scientific thing our brains do to really protect ourselves from diseased people, from dangerous places. Think about it. When you hear creaky floors and wind everywhere and I don't know what that was. You think of a creepy haunted house. You don't just think, wow, this place has really bad HVAC or they need to get their floors fixed. You automatically think, I need to get the hell out of here. And so with Freud and with horror movies, especially zombie movies where things that used to be dead are no longer dead, Freud theorizes that we feel this dread and fear when looking at these stimuli because we're afraid it might hurt us. And it goes against the natural order of things, which our brains, evolution-wise, know that's a big no-no. So fun fact, the idea of the evil twin was originated by Carl Jung, not General Hospital, which I don't know, I always thought soap operas kind of invented that, but I guess it's a real and psychological thing. Jung came up with this idea of our shadow selves, and it actually ties into Freud's repression because our shadow selves are all the parts that we push deeper down or repress so that society doesn't disapprove of us or think of us as messed up or weird. And this shows up, as the idea of, I said, evil twins or doppelgangers, in hyperfixation alert, Twin Peaks, where you see all these doppelgangers doing things that we don't really approve of in our normal day-to-day life. Another example of this is in the Jordan Peele movie Us, in which there's this family who is considered civilized and good members of society, and then they have their doppelgangers that are considered less civilized and abnormal. So who's really the good people in that scenario? The normal family or the abnormal family? How do we decide that? It's society that calculates that, and just because we follow all the rules and conform all the time doesn't necessarily mean that we're good people. And I think that's an example of how horror is important and why these psychological theories are so good at communicating these complicated ideas. And so all these psychological discoveries come together to form the archetype of the villain or the boogeyman. And archetypes are, I guess, boxes or genres that you put people into in order to make their way of thinking make more sense. And they transcend culture and geography, and it's really just universal. And so the idea of the villain or the boogeyman universally is someone that breaks all the rules we set up socially and someone who's really gone against the norm. Like, who cares why we get scared by horror movies? Isn't it not real? And to that I say yes and no. Yes, it's not real. Yes, it's just a story. But the way we interpret fiction, I think, is also the way we interpret our world today. When we learn what makes us feel dread and fear, we can more effectively communicate these, like I said, complicated themes using something entertaining and something to catch someone's attention. Hyperfixation alert, like in Twin Peaks. The whole show is my Diet Coke though. The whole show is about, really at its core, the cycle of abuse and how we can break that cycle with love and acceptance and sometimes going against the norm, even if it makes you seem like a villain. Something to think about.